Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This video I am going to pick up with the carburetor rebuild for the 1947 Dodge M37 3/4 ton military truck. Last video on this, I took it apart and started the cleaning process, walked through the full disassembly. This one I am going to finish up the cleaning and get this thing put back together. So what I'll do is get this camera turned around and get to work. So last video left off, I had just gotten everything completely disassembled as far as I wanted to go. So next on the list is going to be cleaning. I did go out and get some carburetor cleaner. So I'd previously been going over it with just some of these tubble towel wipes and brake cleans. That's what I had handy. But now I do have the carburetor cleaner, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on this main body, float bowl area, things like that, and get all the passages cleaned out and get this thing as clean as I can, and then I'll start working on the upper and lower assemblies. Quick update, gone over the float bowl portion of the carburetor as well as the upper. Went over them again with carburetor cleaner really good, got all through the passages, went over it with a brass brush on the sides and exterior surfaces, and then also use a little bit of a heavier brush on like any of the mating flanges where there's going to be a gasket, trying to get any material off of those. So pretty happy with how they turned out. I'm not looking for them to be show quality perfect, because if you saw my previous video when I filmed the truck itself, it's a little bit dirty under the hood already, so it would stick out like a sore thumb if it looked brand new. So pretty good here. Next, I need to work on the lower portion there, start getting this cleaned up. It's got a bunch of gasket material still on it that I need to get off. I also do have a replacement gasket for the governor, so I might pull that off. I haven't decided if I want to open that can of worms or not, because I think that's a whole nother nightmare if you do start taking it apart. I got to do a little bit of reading before I go down that road, but I will at least work on cleaning it up and get those gasket flanges cleaned for reassembly. Last but not least, here is the throttle body section, lower portion, and I got both flanges nice and clean on that. All the gasket material from the old gaskets removed. It's just cast iron, so it's stained from age. Again, I didn't take the governor apart. This seems to be working fine as far as I can tell, and I don't want to open that can of worms of pulling that apart and having any potential issues. So yeah, at this point in time, I am going to leave that alone. I'll double check, make sure all the screws are tight, which they seem to be, but yeah, that's not coming apart. So next on the list is going to be repairing threads on the float bowl. Previous video I mentioned this hole is stripped out, so I'm waiting to get a re-thread kit that I ordered. I'm pretty sure these are 12/28 based on what I measured and whatnot with what I have. So waiting for that to show up, as well as a tap and die, so I can clean up the existing hardware and the existing holes, make sure everything's good to go. So once that comes in, I will come back and we'll see about getting this thing finalized and then ready for assembly. Been a few days and my tap and die and thread restorer kits have arrived, and I can confirm that it is 12/28 is the pitch of the threads that go into the float bowl for these screws here. I went ahead already and used the die to clean up the existing screws, just run it down on them, and it worked perfectly, so that's definitely the right size. And then I did go ahead and received also a thread restorer kit, again 12/28, so that is the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and run the tap down the existing holes that are good, just to make sure they're all cleaned up, and then I need to repair this one here that is completely stripped out. So I'll come back once that's all done. Okay, went through that one, and ran the correct tap down, as well as the two that are on the underside here of the lid that you can see the fresh threads. Clean those two up, because those are the two bolts that come from underneath. So that's all clean, and then as you can see here, this now has the threaded inserts, basically a helicoil kit. It's just a different brand, because I couldn't find helicoil for this size, but that is the new 12/28 thread, and as you can see, we are good to go. Screw threads in perfectly, so we now have good fasteners for the float bowl, so everything can go back together and hopefully no leaks like it used to do. So now that everything is ready to go, I'm going to do one quick spray cleanup with carburetor cleaner on all the parts, just because there were little pieces of metal and whatnot from running the taps down. Then once they are dry, I'll come back and it will be time to start assembling everything into the float bowl portion of the carburetor. All right, everything is cleaned up one last time and dry. So next I'm going to do is reinstall the new 3 plugs that go in the float bowl. There's one there, and one right there. So just tap them in lightly with a hammer, get them seated, and they should be good to go. They're just like a light pressure fit. So I'm gonna get those installed and then come back. All right, see the 3 plugs have been installed and seated. Again, just used a hammer, and then I'm just using a little quarter drive extension for the 2 smaller ones, this one smaller one here, because couldn't fit the hammer in there, but I could get the hammer directly on that one and the one on the end. So next up is going to be actually starting to put all of the jets into the bowl itself. First one I'm going to start with is that hole there, and it's basically, here's the old one, what it looks like. It's a little stubby hex head, and it has a gasket on it. So I'm going to pull that out of my new parts kit and get that installed. I believe we use a 5/16 socket, and that should be able to thread that in. There we go, that jet is installed. So next thing I am going to do is install the accelerator pump jet. I believe that's what it is. It goes in that hole there next to the accelerator pump. That consists of the valve, the jet valve. There's the old one, there's the new one. There is a ball bearing that goes in the bottom. And the rebuild kit that you get should come with 2 ball bearings. One is large, one is small. You want to use the small one, and then you will reuse your old spring. The kit did not come with a replacement spring for this part, so I'm going to go ahead and get these installed. All right, little problem. Went to install the new part that came in the kit. It is actually a different size in this part. It will not go in. They are visibly different. Where you see this lip here, this one is much smaller than that one, so that will not seat. So what I did is I went ahead, took the original one, used some carb cleaner, blew out the hole there, blew out those holes, and blew it out from the top. Everything's flowing all right. So I think we're gonna be good to just reuse this. One thing to note is the spring, it's already in there. There's a big end and a small end. Small end goes down on top of the ball bearing. Big end will fit over the end of the actual jet itself. So I'm gonna go ahead, get this jet reinstalled. That jet's now installed. Next thing I'm going to address is the plug that goes here. Here's the old one, here's the new one. Just going to go ahead, use a screwdriver, get the new one installed in the side. Next up is this needle. You can see I think it's actually a jet, not so much a needle, but yeah, here's the old one. The new one's shinier. That will go right here into this spot. So I'm going to go ahead, grab that, install it with a screwdriver, and come back. Next on the list is this jet, or metering block, whatever you want to call it. That's actually what the main needle slides in and out of. I'm going to go ahead, get that installed. It goes in the hole down there in that crevice. So it should have a little gasket on it, and then Flathead just installs it. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that and get it installed. All right, as you can see, all set there. Just be careful when you're installing that. It does want to cross thread, so just be very careful that you don't do that, because it's kind of an awkward angle trying to get that long piece in the hole, and there's not a whole lot of room to maneuver, but it is in place. So next thing I'm gonna do is get the float installed. So there's what the float looks like, and the kit should come with a new pivot pin and new retainer there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get everything put together and get it installed. I want that in before I put the actual valve, like fuel inlet needle valve installed. This way it keeps pieces from falling out of the needle valve for the fuel inlet. So I'm gonna get that put in place, and I'll be back once that's done. As you can see, floats are in. I was able to use the new pivot pin, but I had to reuse the old retainer because the new one that came with the rebuild kit is too thick to fit in the groove. Would not seat properly, so I just grabbed the old one, put it in. All it does is just slide in on top. You'll see that it's notched and keyed. It gets thinner at the bottom for the pivot pin, and then there's like a stop where the tabs, similar to what you see here, on the bottom of this seat, and that just holds it in place. So that is good there. Next is going to be the fuel inlet. So the fuel inlet for this kit came already assembled in that little paper, all bound up. There's a plunger, a spring, then the actual needle inside that would keep, shut the fuel off if needed. So you'll install that with the proper size gasket that the kit comes with, just in from the outside. Off the top of my head, it's a 9/16 wrench. I'll know for sure once I go and install it. But yeah, pretty straightforward. Just go ahead, thread it in, tighten it up, and then the plunger will be held in place by the float tab that you see there. All right, nice and snug in place. Yes, it is a 9/16 wrench, and you can see the plunger sticking out there, and then again, as the float bowls are lifted up with fuel, it pushes in on that, and that's what closes the needle inside of the inlet valve. So that is all done. Next on the list, I am going to mess with the accelerator pump. Real quick, before I went ahead and I'm going to do the accelerator pump, I went and set the float height. 5/64 is the spec. Basically, this is the spring assisted valve. So you can also get a solid one. So with the spring assist, basically all I did was just hold it closed and then used a measure to get off the top there and make sure that we're where we're supposed to be. So 5/64 is the number. Pretty good there. It just can be within a 64th, so make sure you don't mess it up. But now next is going to be the accelerator pump. As far as this goes, you have the leather end that goes down in this hole here. Make sure that everything is good and cleaned out. I've already gone down there a couple of times and made sure it moves smoothly. And then same thing with the top hat. The top portion, that piston needs to be able to set in there nice and clean, and free to move. So those are things to look for when doing that assembly. As you can see, the accelerator pump, I have the piston dropped into the bore of the top hat. I did make sure that the plunger would slide in and out, no problem. There's no binding, it's pretty free to move, so good to go there. And then I have the gasket in place. Make sure all your holes are not covered or anything like that, that everything's gonna breathe, especially the few vacuum ports and stuff that you see in here. Very important that those work well. So last thing that I need to do is put the main jet in place with the spring and ball, and then I can get this thing assembled. So here's what I'll be using. The kit came with a new spring, new ball, and then the new assembly. So the ball will go down here first, then the spring, and then the assembly, and make sure the needle goes into that jet there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that installed. All right, everything's in and everything's moving freely like it should, so that is good to go. So that's pretty much just leaves putting this portion on top of this half. Like I said, you're just going to guide this into its bore here, make sure that it slides freely down, and then start screwing everything together. Pretty straightforward. Both halves are together, gaskets in place. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting things together, tighten things up. You'll use the long needle screw here in the center, and then just remember the two shorts go here on either side of the fuel inlet. The two longers go on each side of the accelerator pump, and then there's the two hex heads that come up from the bottom. All right, everything is started and just not completely torqued down yet. But again, two shorts you're going to reuse here, two longs you're going to reuse on either side of the accelerator pump. The kit should come with a new center valve. This is what it looks like. It's a needle valve, and it also is like the main assembly screw. And then on either side of the air inlet, you have the two hex heads. My kit came with two new ones of those to replace these old ones here. So I'm going to go ahead and just get everything snugged down really good, and then we can start messing with getting the lower portion on. And there we are. Everything is assembled as far as the top and the middle go. One thing I forgot to mention, there should be a little gasket or seal on the bottom of this center screw. Make sure you have that and it's tight. And all I really did, like I said, is I kind of walked around, started with the center, snugged that down, the outside, snugged those down, the upper ones, or the ones from the bottom up, snugged those down, and just did that a couple of times until nothing would really move anymore, just using a screwdriver. So should be pretty good and snug now. So next is going to be getting the bottom portion assembled to the upper portion. So last thing will be to mount the upper or the upper and middle on the lower. Real quick, I did go ahead and replace this plug here because I realized that my rebuild kit had this. I didn't notice that previously. It must have just been underneath a couple of the other items. So Did pull out the old one, same way I did the 4 or the 3 that were on this one. Just, used a hammer and kind of a chisel or screwdriver, tapped out slowly underneath it, and it popped out pretty easily. And then hammered the new one in and just used quarter drive extension. I used this end actually to kind of seat it properly, similar to doing like a plug or anything like that on a car. So anyway, I'm gonna grab the correct gasket, clean the surfaces, and get ready to mount the big portion to the lower base. Everything looks good and ready to go. So these are the 3 original fasteners that held the bottom to the float bowl section. The rebuild kit came with 2 new long ones, but not the short ones. So I'm gonna reuse the short one, but I have 2 new long ones to use for the assembly. And then here's the gasket. Just make sure you lay it down. All the holes are, good, lined up, not covered, because you definitely want that vacuum port to be able to do its thing. So I'm gonna go ahead, get everything assembled, and I'll come back once it's done. And there it is, rebuilt carb, ready to go back on the truck. So one thing I'm gonna mention that I completely forgot about is this screw here, which is for holding on the bottom, is not very easy to get to when the top cover is on because of the air horn. Probably be a lot easier to put the bottom onto the middle before you put the top on. It is possible. I was able to get a screwdriver in kind of at an angle right through here until I got it to the really tight spot, and then just kind of laid the screwdriver flat and was able to just hold it in there and kind of pull like that, if that makes sense, and get it tight that way. But you have the one here that's hard to get to if the hat's on. The one back here was fine, and then there's the shorter one that comes up from the bottom. That's obviously fine. So, but anyway, here is the carburetor. I can't remember if I mentioned it previously, but there was a spring in the rebuild kit that looked like it went here. There was no spring here previously. It was probably lost over the years. This is the choke assembly, and it just looks like it's a dampener in case you over pull the choke lever or whatnot. So put that spring in. Seems like that's where it's supposed to go. Fits just fine there. Put the gasket on here, and then the washers and nuts so I don't lose them, and remember to take them with me back to the museum. And then I boxed up the lower gasket, and yeah, that is it, ready to go. So I'm gonna get this thing packaged up and take it down to the museum and get it reinstalled on the truck. So sadly, it has been a few days and I am back home, and right there you can see the carburetor is here with me. I did go to the museum and installed it, had everything on, was putting the fuel line on, tightening the flare for the line coming up from the fuel pump into the adapter fitting that goes into the carb where the float needle valve is. And unfortunately, even though I had a wrench on both parts, that piece turned a little bit in the carb and tore out what was remaining of the threads that are inside the carburetor float bowl housing. It's just chintzy pot metal or whatever it's made out of, so it doesn't take much. You saw in previous video, I already had, or in this video previously, that I had to tap the area, rethread one of the screw holes for the top portion where it goes into the middle bowl, and now I'm going to have to get a thread kit to fix the fuel inlet. So I'm going to end this one here, and it appears there is going to be a third video in this process because I'm going to have to order the parts and whatnot, and this video is already pretty long. So that being said, I'm going to wrap it up here. If you like what you're seeing, you want to follow along, see how things turn out, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. It's greatly appreciated if you do. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I do review them and I will reply. That being said, thank you very much for watching and have a great day.